All right, I'm going to get recording and we will get going. Without further ado, welcome to Spring Garden Design. My name is Kari Kwas. I work with the Snohomish Conservation District. Tonight, I'm joined by some colleagues with the City of Everett and also WSU Extension. Our main speaker is Emily Bishton, and I will introduce them all as we come through. I wanted to definitely recognize City of Everett for their partnership on this program. They sponsored two series, a spring series and a fall series of natural yard care classes. We're really just trying to protect the environment and keep stormwater from hitting Puget Sound. So thanks for being here tonight. Thanks to the city. And then we also partner with WSU Extension, the Master Gardeners program, and folks that work on rain gardens too. So thanks for everyone being here tonight. So again, there's me. I was at the plant sale. We're those people. So if you want native plants, we're one of the resources. Emily is going to go through a bunch of different things related to that as we get into the presentation itself. But you can always find that on our events calendar or sign up for e-news so that way you know what's going on with us. So quickly, just a conservation district for those that aren't aware, we're a state agency, we're a special district. We represent Snohomish County and Camino Island. So we focus our work here, but there's conservation districts wherever you live. And we help with technical assistance, help landowners. We come out and do free site visits. And a lot of the stuff we will be talking about tonight, we could come out to your house and tell you what might work, what won't work, that kind of thing. So we just want to make the earth a better place to live. Tonight, we're going to have the Q&A, and you'll find at the bottom of your screen. Emily is going to have a break in the middle for questions, and then she'll also take questions at the end. So if a question comes to you, feel free to chat it or get it into the Q&A box, and then we will address that over time. Karen from WSU will be helping me with that process. If you have a technical question, feel free to enter that into the chat, and I will take care of that for you. And we are recording this, as I said, so you can catch it later. So tonight I am joined by April Hines with the City of Everett. April, did you want to say a few words?
Yeah, I just wanted to introduce myself. This is April Hines with the City of Everett. I'm the Public Information Education Specialist in Public Works. And we actually are so excited to have you all here, and just wanted to point out that we do offer this series of workshops in the spring and in the fall. And really the idea behind them is we want to really put out the idea of how important natural yard care is. And it's one of the ways that you can make a difference in stormwater runoff pollutants and what happens in your local environment. And can you do the next slide, Kari? And we just wanted to highlight that you do get a flyer in your utility bill twice a year, and it is called our Green Home, Green Garden flyer. And it actually will highlight not only the workshop that you're at tonight, and along with the ones that are coming up, which we do have Ladd Smith coming to talk about smart watering next Tuesday. And then we will have our rain garden rebate workshop on the 29th. And again, don't forget, even though it is going to start to rain, you can still sign up to do a self-guided rain garden tour. So you can check out some of the rain gardens in North Everett. And then the next series will be in the fall. So you can start to look for another newsletter flyer in your utility bill in the fall. So really happy that you guys are here. And then I'll pass along back to Kari.
Excellent. I want to make sure if someone else could type in the chat, if you're able to hear us okay. One person said they couldn't hear, but just want to make sure that someone can just type in and say, yes, you can hear us just fine. That would be great. Perfectly. Okay, good. So Mel, try something with your speakers. Thank you for answering, Sarah and Angela. So Karen is with us tonight, and she's one of the master gardeners. So as we get to those question and answer periods, she'll be leading us through that. So thank you so much. And then just a little bit about master gardeners. They are also all over the place, but in our case, they are tied to Snohomish County, and they are the answer people. And typically, at least when I've used the service, they may not have the answer immediately, but then they are so happy to look it up for you and get back to you. So they offer gardening advice. They're interested in sustainable gardening, which is great. They practice integrated pest management, IPM, and they don't know everything, but they will get an answer for you. So by all means, reach out to them. I know that they've been doing emails, and then if they get phone messages, they'll give you a call back. So check out Master Gardeners. They're great helps around here. So without further ado, I do want to introduce our featured speaker this evening, Emily Bishton. And Emily is an environmental educator and landscape designer who has gardened organically for over 35 years. Since 1997, she has taught gardening and environmental education programs for adults and children throughout the Puget Sound region, and designed a wide variety of wildlife-friendly, child-friendly, and edible gardens. Emily is also the farmer director and lead educator for the Magnuson Community Center Nature Programs, which focus on garden and nature education for children and families. And she is currently a volunteer with the Magnuson Children's Garden Committee. So thank you so much for being here tonight. One other thing I wanted to add also is just our order of the evening, so people know what's coming. We're going to be talking about landscaping with native plants, stormwater runoff prevention, creating backyard wildlife habitat, and growing your own food. And a lot of this also just came from that whole idea of that people, they see a beautiful garden, they think, how did you get there? I can't possibly do this. And you can. So here's some befores and afters. Emily tonight is going to kind of talk about how one would go from just a grassy field like that to raised beds, or maybe it would just be gardening in your earth. In this case, another just lawn turned into raised beds and a rain barrel, and ways that you can water your gardens. Also, just again, this is pretty simple. You can go from one thing to another. It just takes a little bit of time, a little bit of effort, a little know-how, tapping your resources. So tonight I welcome Emily to share with us how we do this. So I will stop sharing, and so she can share next.
Thank you, Kari.
Thank you so much.
Okay, well, let me get back to my opening slide. Sorry about that. There we go. So as Kari said, we're going to cover 4 different topics, but they are all related to each other. And so I won't, because of the time frame that we have, I won't be able to go super in depth on each one, but I am going to give you the highlights of each of these types of gardening and how to get there. And they do dovetail together. So I hope that this will, no matter which one of these topics is the most interesting to you, that you will enjoy the whole thing. I am also going to turn my video off during the presentation just to make sure that the audio stays really clear. And I found that that seems to help, but I'll still be here. You just won't see me live. Okay. Okay. So landscaping with native plants. The first slide is, why use native plants in your garden? And there are some really, really good reasons. I, as a landscape designer, have never suggested to someone to pull out all their non-native plants and replace them, because for one thing, that's a huge investment. And for another thing is that non-native plants have, many of them have a really good place in our gardens. But I consider native plants to be a really good foundation for any garden. And if you're starting a brand new garden, I would highly recommend using majority native plants for these reasons. They thrive in our climate, no matter whether we have the wettest March in history or the hottest August in history. Native plants tend to sail through these kinds of big temperature swings and extremes easier than non-native plants, because they've been here, they've been growing here in the Pacific Northwest for hundreds of years, if not more. And many native plants also are very low water use, which is an important part of gardening, because using less water means more water stays available for salmon and for other really important purposes. So they are really good for having a low water use landscape as well. And they are absolutely gorgeous. This is one of my very favorites that's on this slide, nicknamed high bush cranberry. And you can actually cook and eat these berries yourself. People make jelly out of them and things like that. But they are also extremely attractive to birds and other wildlife. But this is an example of a plant that just has, like many native plants, has year-round beauty with the fruits, and it has big white or creamy colored flowers that bloom in the springtime, and it has beautiful fall color, and I really think that native plants, no matter whether you have a somewhat formal garden or a cottage garden or something in between, they really blend well with any garden style. And we'll talk more about this when we get into the prevention of stormwater runoff, but really important aspect of native plants is that many of them also have a very fibrous and dense root system that can help stabilize slopes on your property and keep the soil able to percolate water, and so they reduce the erosion that comes sometimes from heavy rains, and really reduce the runoff, stormwater runoff. So they're great for preserving good water quality in the Puget Sound region. Because native plants have evolved here in the Northwest, where there's typically very poor organic matter in native soil in the forests, because of all of our rain, organic matter gets depleted in the soil very fast, and as well as other nutrients. And so the fact that they have grown well here for so long means that they don't really require a lot of input from you as a homeowner, and in terms of continually adding organic matter or fertilizer. And they also have very few pest problems compared to non-native plants. So these are additional reasons why they're great choices. And these are just three of my favorites. The little fringe cup flower with the sword fern in the back, a vine maple, and then a red flowering currant. And we'll go into depth on this a little bit more when we talk about creating backyard wildlife habitat. Native plants really provide the best kind of habitat for birds and for beneficial insects and other wildlife. Because the birds and the insects and other wildlife have also evolved in this area for so long, they recognize native plants and the food that they provide, whether that's the food on the plant itself, like berries or seeds, or whether it's that they know which insects they would find on that plant. So it's also very beneficial for wildlife to have native plants in your garden. Native plants are very versatile in the way that many of them can grow well in dry shade, because though we get a lot of rain, we also have a lot of huge conifers that drink up all the rainwater that falls, and also have a rain shadow underneath them where it stays very dry. And so these are three plants that I've found that do very well in that dry shade condition, and that if you go in the forest, sometimes you will find them, these very plants in the shadiest and driest areas. And that is bleeding heart, low Oregon grape, and sword fern. Soggy spots are another common thing in our natural areas in Western Washington. And the high bush cranberry is a plant that I showed before, that it loves to have it wet soil in its root zone, and it likes to be in full sun, but it can handle part shade. Some of these other plants, the wild ginger is in the center, and then the salmonberry on the right, and skunk cabbage. These are all plants that thrive in these kind of soggy, bog-like places that you might have at the bottom of a slope, or if other properties are around you are sloping towards yours, you may have wet areas in your yard that you're looking for plants to thrive in. And there are these plants and many others that will thrive in those conditions as well. If your whole garden is really sunny and the soil is dry, if you have a lot of sand content and the water drains fast and it's hot, if you have a lot of hardscape, like the street pavement or sidewalks or rock walls that create hot spots in your garden, there are native plants that thrive there too. The ones here pictured as tall Oregon grape on the far left, a wonderful wildlife plant also. And in the center, kinnikinnick as a ground cover that, it thrives very well on, very dry cliffs overlooking the Puget Sound. It can handle salt spray as well. And so can the shore pine on the right. Some examples of shade loving or part sun loving natives are the nine bark, or Physocarpus is its botanical name. Beautiful, beautiful winter structure with peely bark. Snowberry, which keeps its berries well through winter and sometimes even into spring. And then our native vine maple, which has, I think it rivals the Japanese maple for the beauty of the structure and the color of the leaves in the fall. It can be a really stunning addition to your garden and very low maintenance. And one of my very favorites, the evergreen huckleberry, because it will thrive in sun or shade and bear fruit in sun or shade that is very delicious, as long as you can get it before the birds do. They will go for it big time. And it also can handle moist soil or dry soil. And then a couple here that are near natives. They're not technically native to the Northwest, the Washington part of the Northwest, but the Pacific wax myrtle, or America californica, is native to the southern half of Oregon and northern California. Also very tolerant of salt spray, and a beautiful green screen, and grows really well in the Northwest and in the Puget Sound area. It's one of my favorites, and a great wildlife attracting plant. The Arbutus unedo, or strawberry tree, named for its large strawberry-like fruits, is also not a native. It's actually a Mediterranean plant, but it's very closely related to our native madrona tree, which has really had a lot of problems surviving in our urban areas. And so this is a tree that attracts wildlife in the same way that it attracts hummingbirds as well as other pollinators for the beautiful flowers that come in clusters in the fall and early winter, and then followed by this big fruit that is actually, it's edible for us too, but it is not super tasty. But the birds and the squirrels and the chipmunks love it. So basically, these slides that I've just shown you are not to say that you have to plant these particular plants, but really to illustrate that no matter what kind of conditions there are in your garden, there are native plants that will thrive there and be beautiful. And this photograph here is from the Arboretum in Seattle that shows a Doug fir with this low Oregon grape that I showed earlier while it was in flower. This is what it looks like the rest of the year as an evergreen, low evergreen shrub, and just thriving right up in that big dry spot under the Doug fir. So just an example of plants, and that's why I also included on the handout that you'll receive after the presentation is over, there is a list of some of my favorite native plants, which includes most all the ones that are I've showed you so far. But the list will include not only their name, but their height and width, the wildlife value that they have, and then the kind of landscape aesthetic of kind of the place they could fulfill in your landscape, and their practical things about them and how to care for them. So it's a pretty thorough list. But I also there's a list of resources on that same handout that you'll receive that will tell you where to buy native plants by visiting the Washington Native Plant Society website. They have a list of all the nurseries in the Puget Sound area that carry native plants, and also links to the Snohomish Conservation District, and because they have a fantastic plant sale every spring, and many other resources that will help you find native plants, but also help you choose native plants that will thrive in your garden conditions. So no matter what you have in your yard, whatever trouble spots you have, I will say that there is definitely native plants that will really beautify any area of your garden. So now we're going to go to preventing stormwater runoff, which is extremely important. It gets more important every year as more and more of the open space in Puget Sound areas becomes developed. And also a lot of times when the development happens, the soil that remains open is sometimes compacted or disturbed in other ways to where it's not absorbing the kind of rainfall that it could either. And each of us, no matter whether you have a big yard or a small one, the way that you garden and the choices that you make will help solve the problems. As we all work together, then each of our little, eighth of an acre, quarter of an acre, or 10 acres, whatever you have, each of it adds up to providing a huge amount of benefit to Puget Sound and to all the waterways in our region, and really can make a difference in reducing the runoff that goes into erosion problems in Puget Sound, and also the kind of practices you use can reduce the amount of pollution that goes into our waterways too. So I'm a big believer in using prevention of stormwater runoff as a guideline to really all the decisions you make in your garden. So a little bit about what stormwater runoff is, as just a little background, because it's a term that gets talked about a lot, but sometimes not explained too much. But basically, any kind of impermeable surface that will not absorb water itself is generating stormwater runoff every time it rains. So our roofs are a big one, because they're putting all their water down into our gutters and downspouts. Your driveway, which could be big or small, and even if your driveway is paved with crushed rock, that reduces its permeability, though it still could be permeable, but even gravel driveways tend to get more and more impermeable the more they get driven on and the more that the soil is compacted underneath them. Sidewalks, if you're living in an urban area, Sidewalks are kind of an under the radar kind of runoff generating thing, because they don't seem very big, but when you take a 5-foot sidewalk and think you know that there's, you know, thousands and tens of thousands of feet of that 5-foot sidewalk running through our urban areas, that's a lot of square footage of impermeable surfaces. And another kind of thing that gets under the radar is our lawns. Our lawns in the Northwest can become very impermeable. And many times it's the cause of having lawns that are unhealthy because they can't really absorb the water anymore. And that can happen through just the use of a mower back and forth. It starts pushing all the air out of the soil, and there's no pockets for the water to go into. Foot traffic can do that. And also just the driving rain of winter, and you know, from fall to spring, the kind of rains that we get, that just that can start pushing the air out and making our lawns a source of significant runoff. And when we're talking about runoff, it's really good to, you don't have to memorize any facts and figures here, but it's just good to get a picture of what that really means. So the calculation that is used is that for every 1,000 square feet of an impermeable surface, every time it rains 1 inch, that 1,000 square feet generates 628 gallons of runoff. So because we get approximately around 37 inches of precipitation, and that includes rain and snow, and most of which falls between October and March, you can just, even just looking at these figures, you can just kind of guess how many millions and millions of gallons of runoff is coming out of our urban and suburban areas, and even our rural areas, because of how much impermeable surfaces there are. And for a long time, there was still a lot of open space, and there wasn't, I guess there wasn't such bad events happening that really caught the eye of our cities and our governments and our, you know, Environmental Protection Agency. But there were 2 events that happened in back-to-back years that I experienced along with everybody else around here, if you were living here then. And that caused so much mass flooding and destruction that it was impossible to, you know, to ignore the kind of effect it was having on our entire region. And that was in December of '06, where we had this flash flood of about 3 inches of rain in about an hour. So only time that I can remember in the 40 some years that I've lived in the Seattle area that much rain fell that fast, and it caused a lot of flash flooding. And then the following December, we had a huge storm that flooded just an enormous amount of acreage in the county, in the 3-county area in Western Washington. And it really was a wake-up call for the whole region. And here are some examples of what runoff does. So you can see, if your soil is running off in the upper left, if your soil is running off into the storm drains in your urban area, you can see the mud going in there, and that builds up and creates a plume of what you see coming in the picture directly below it, coming out of this little creek. Just this plume of soil coming out of there, and that is very difficult for aquatic life to thrive with that kind of conditions. And then you can see in the picture on the right, what that water can do pouring in can be very a waterfall coming out of a pipe like that is a big erosion concern. But also if that runoff is carrying pollutants from pesticides used in our lawns or anywhere else, that can cause great harm. And our quality of life in the Northwest is so based on the beautiful scenery, the beautiful waters that we have all around us, and the mountains, and it's a wonderful place. And so each of us doing our part to reduce this kind of impact will really, really make a difference. So I'm going to outline 6 things that you can do, and that are not massive investments either. So planting trees and shrubs is something that, we were talking about earlier with the landscaping with native plants, using native plants, using other plants. Planting trees and shrubs helps your soil absorb more water and slows down runoff. In a case of this parking strip garden, there's a sidewalk right above it that is shedding all of its stormwater in there. If that was just a grass bed, or just a paved bed, which sometimes people pave their parking strips to make a place to get in and out of a car easier, then it would have no ability to absorb that runoff from that sidewalk. And this way it's slowing it down. It spreads it out in the soil and allows it to sink in so that your plants will drink it up. And plants that are planting beds that are put next to your driveway can help absorb that sheeting runoff coming from your driveway also, or a paved patio. Anything you can do with trees and shrubs and ground covers to slow, spread, sink, and drink is the little thing that I like to say, that helps you think about where your planting beds are and what they can do to absorb and slow down and spread out that runoff. As one example of how amazing the trees are, is that they can absorb a lot of runoff. Trees they need a lot of water, and they sink their roots down deep and create a underground kind of network of roots that will keep drinking up that water year round if they're conifers or other evergreens, and then during the growing season, deciduous trees drink up and absorb an enormous amount of water, and their root system in the soil can actually slow the water down as it moves through the soil as well. Another thing you can do that you can combine with planting beds or do on its own is to create a rock-filled trench, or a swale, it's sometimes called, next to your sidewalk or next to your driveway, that you build in a place where you know that the water is naturally sheeting, because all of our driveways as well as sidewalks are built so that they do sheet water off of them, so water doesn't build up and puddle up on them. So where that water is sheeting to, you can help direct it into a low spot where it can build up a little bit. It's sort of an informal rain garden also. But this particular one was designed to have a rock kind of bolster at the end right next to the driveway that you see right off to the left. And then on the other end, it's actually absorbing and taking in water from a downspout of that house too. It's just not visible in this picture, but there are many, many, many native plants that will thrive in these real wet spots, as I mentioned earlier. And also in the upper part, in the margins of these swales or rock trenches, there are many native plants that will sink their roots down into that wet swale, but also be able to thrive a lot in the drier soils at the upper parts and in the surrounding areas. If you're putting in any kind of a new walkway or a patio, the thing to do to increase the ability to prevent the runoff is to make the paving permeable. And so that means that there's, using like a sandstone or another paving stone that has spaces in between it that are filled with sand or finely crushed rock. And that allows water to be absorbed by the walkway and all walkways have a gravel or crushed rock base underneath them too, that can act like a little drain field underneath that walkway and store water and let it percolate down into the soil. Even broken concrete walkways like the one in the upper right picture are a great way to, reuse something that instead of taking it to the dump, to reuse broken concrete to make a nice level walkway that is now permeable. And driveways and parking areas can also be made permeable by the way that they're built. So on the left, you see a driveway that has a planting bed right down the middle, and the strips of pavement that go all the way up next to the house are angled towards that center spot so that they are funneling and sheeting their rainfall and runoff into that little planting bed, which is planted with a very, very low ground cover that is, if you step on it, it doesn't die. It can put up with some foot traffic too. So if you accidentally, drive on the middle part, it's not the end of the world. And down below is another shot of that same driveway in the earlier photo that shows that the driveway itself was made with permeable pavers and allowed water to go through in between. So there's less sheeting even happening, and then the sheeting that was happening was being captured by the little rock swales that went along the driveway. And as I mentioned earlier, crushed rock in the upper picture as a little parking area or as a driveway, it is very permeable when it's first installed. It tends to get less permeable, but it still usually retains some permeability. So if you decide that that's the best solution for your parking area or a walkway or driveway, you still are helping with stormwater runoff. If you're creating a seating area, you can also use crushed rock there, and it keeps its permeability much longer when it's just foot traffic on it, rather than vehicle traffic. And also beautiful patios can be made with the broken concrete that was in the previous slide, but also paving stones and sandstone and things like that. Large and small patios every little bit helps when you're talking about preventing the runoff. Building a rain garden is one of the most beautiful kind of ways, I think, to handle your downspout runoff, because you can build a rain garden that just has one downspout going into it, or you can have multiple downspouts going into it. It depends on how much space you have and other calculations that are available, and it's on the resource sheet that you'll get, the fact sheet that comes with this presentation. Links to the the Snohomish County Rainscaping Program that April mentioned, and also a WSU program or sponsored program with the stewardship partners called the 12,000 Rain Garden Program. Rain gardens, if you didn't know this was a rain garden, you would just think it was a really awesome planting bed, but it is also functioning as a way to take that downspout water, instead of going into the storm drain or some detention pond or other managed thing that has been built, it's being absorbed by the land next to your house. And it's a beautiful way to garden, and it also can fit with any garden style. The way that typically, to just sort of provide a little summary about what a rain garden is, it's like a bowl similar to the swale that was in the earlier picture. You can plant plants that can handle dry conditions around the top of the bowl. And then as you get halfway down, it's plants that are happier with a little bit more moisture. And then in the very bottom, plants that can handle just being in wet, soggy soil for the whole winter. So this rain garden shows mostly non-native plants, but there are many native plants, beautiful native flowers that will make a gorgeous rain garden. You can make your rain garden have a theme, such as plants that attract pollinators or plants that attract birds and other wildlife. This rain garden was on a neighborhood tour, and you can see it attracted a lot of neighbors too. And I'm sure they enjoyed looking at the bees and butterflies, visiting all these beautiful perennials. And here it is in the front yard. If you didn't know it was a rain garden, you wouldn't just look at that and go rain garden, because they can be built in ways that they just look like an awesome garden bed. And there are ways to do them that are not prohibitively expensive, and you may already have plants in your yard that you could transplant to be part of the rain garden as well. And then back to lawns, because a lot of us have lawns, and lawns have a purpose. And especially if you have kids or you like to play croquet or other outdoor games, lawns can be a really valuable thing to have and a really well-used part of your garden. The main thing is to remember to aerate your lawn frequently. If your lawn is in a full sun and exposed to the full rain, without a lot of tree cover over it, you will probably benefit by aerating it once a year. I would say once every other year for a minimum for pretty much any lawn, because of how much the air gets pushed out of our lawns in the Northwest. And when you aerate, there's a machine that takes out little cores. You may have seen that. You may have done that in your own yard before, or seen it in a neighbor's yard where there's all these little cores laying on the surface, and they gradually decompose and go back into the soil. You don't have to rake them all up and get rid of them or anything. And it really makes a difference to aerate your lawn, and then especially to sprinkle compost in those holes and just rake it in, or just kind of throw some buckets of compost around and rake them in with a lawn rake and rake them into those holes, because then you're adding organic matter and adding air to your lawn, and it will really increase its ability to absorb rain instead of it just running off like a sheet. It also will make your lawn much healthier, and instead of having bare patches like you can see in this lawn, you could have your whole lawn stay green much longer, even in the dry times of the year. And no matter what changes that you make, it's really important to build and maintain healthy soil. In your lawn, you can do that with the aeration and top dressing with compost. You can do that in your garden beds by digging in compost to them or mulching with compost. But organic matter is really important for all plants. It really helps them establish a healthy root system that goes deep into the soil, helps them use less water because they can absorb water deeper into the soil. Their growth will be more regular in terms of not just a big burst when it's warm and sunny and then no growth. Otherwise, it helps them do kind of a steady, even growth. And the healthier your soil is, especially when it's filled with plants, it will absorb so much more runoff than soil that has been compacted or is really short of organic matter. And the equation I like to use is just healthy soil equals healthy roots equals healthy plants. We don't see what goes on under the soil. It's the invisible part, and it's sometimes the hardest work to building healthy soil. And you don't get the visual, bliss that you get from seeing your plants thriving and the upper part of your plants thriving. But if your plants have healthy roots, they're going to be so much healthier and resistant to pests and diseases. So it's really important to think about what's going on under the surface when you're thinking about your garden in general, but also in terms of runoff and erosion. So if you're building in a new bed, you can dig in that 3-inch layer of compost or other organic matter fairly easily. If you are going to want to add organic matter to an existing bed that's full of trees and shrubs already, then you don't want to disturb those roots. So, you can mulch with the compost and let the earthworms and the rain gradually work it in. I like to lay some on top and then take a little garden fork or a soil rake and just kind of disturb the soil surface a little bit without digging into any roots, and just to kind of help break the surface tension in the soil and get that little bit of compost integrated into that top layer of soil so that it's more easily washed in by rain or by watering, and it's easier for earthworms and other organisms in your soil to be able to take it down under and get it down into the root zone. And you may have to mulch a couple of times to get the equivalent of that 3-inch layer, depending on your beds. But it's a really good idea to make sure and keep some organic matter in your soil and replenish it as needed. If you have really, really sandy soil, your organic matter is going to wash into your soil with the rain much quicker than if you have clay in your soil or you just have a lesser degree of sand. We all pretty much have a lot of sand in our soils in the Northwest, but some folks have a lot more sand than others. So if you know that your soil is really sandy, I would plan on replenishing your organic matter more often. And you can do that not only by adding compost, but by mulching with things like fallen leaves and arbutus wood chips, big chunky wood chips, so that you are just, as that decomposes, it's gradually feeding that organic matter into your soil without you having to go back in and dig any organic matter in. Okay, well, that's the end of our first half. And as I said, this is kind of a quick overview of these topics. So that's why I put a lot of resources in the handout that you'll receive tomorrow about all of these topics so that you can take it further and visit the online resources and also that utilize the Master Gardener hotline and other resources to really get custom information for your own garden. But I am ready for some questions.
Okay, we just have a few questions. The first one, somebody wanted to know when you had the picture of the runoff, where that plume was located. The picture you had from the sky, I think they wanted to know where that was.
You know, I don't know where that was taken. That picture was given to me by the 12,000 Rain Garden program, the Stewardship Partners runs. And so it's possible that if you go to their website, which is one of the resources on the handout you'll receive, you may see that photograph with a label on it that would tell you, but it definitely is in the Puget Sound area.
Okay. Another question is, if you're putting in swale where you have a low spot in the lawn, would you need to line it in order to keep the lawn from coming back?
So I think I understand it correctly in that you want to have a swale without the lawn grass coming back.
I think probably in the lawn. So how do you keep the lawn from coming back
Into the swale.
into the swale? I guess that's my,
Yeah, and you wouldn't line it in a traditional sense like you would line with a pond with a pond liner, but what you could do is do what's called sheet mulching, and that is that you mulch with either cardboard or newspaper or a combination of both with a very thick layer. If you're going to use newspaper, you're going to do 10 sheets thick and overlap the layers so that no air or sunlight gets between them. You will overlap them. And so by doing that and then putting the plants in over the top of that, and you would, and putting some soil and rock and things over the top of that, it will kill the grass because the grass will not get any sunlight and it will turn to compost under that. And sheet mulching is a great way to turn any part of your lawn into a garden bed without digging out the lawn itself, which is hard work. And even if you're using a sod cutter, it's really hard. So sheet mulching is a super way to do things. I highly recommend it. And there are some, I'm trying to think if there's like Seattle Tilth, I believe, has a handout that you can download from their website that, and it's not on, unfortunately, that's not on the resources, but if you go to Seattle Tilth, TILTH.org, I believe you will find a handout about how to sheet mulch. And it gives you kind of a step-by-step thing to do that helps you make sure that the grass doesn't come back either in the middle of any new bed or swale or around the edges. And it gives you a nice clean edge to your bed. So that's what I would recommend.
okay. Somebody wanted to know what size gravel should we use for pathways?
Good question. Good question. I would say optimally, the best thing to do would be to use what's called 5/8 minus, so 5/8. 5/8 of an inch is what it is, crushed rock. And then, but it has little fines in it. It has little smaller pieces of rock in it, and use that for a base layer. So, put a couple inches of that down and then top it with what's called 1/4 minus. And it's the same thing. It's just that it's 1/4 of an inch instead of 5/8 of an inch in the size of the rock. And that's a little bit better for if you're moving a wheelbarrow around or for walking. It's not quite as chunky. So it makes a good top layer, but that having that bigger 5/8 rock underneath creates more permeability. And in many cases, you could do 5/8 for the whole thing. You could do the just the 5/8, but the quarter minus is a little more refined looking and a little bit easier to move around on. And especially if you are if you think, you know, that there may be some wheelchair users, that's one of the requirements for a truly wheelchair accessible path, is that it has that finer layer on top that's easier to roll on. But you can do a path with just the 5/8 minus.
Okay, here's another one. Any suggestions for building a small retaining wall where railroad ties have deteriorated? Don't really want to use concrete blocks.
Okay, well, yeah, it's good to get the railroad ties out of there. They've got a lot, the old ones have creosote in them, which isn't a good thing to have in your garden. And you can use landscape rock, which actually coincidentally is in the slide that, or in the photo on this slide. And the rocks in this picture are what they call one-man rocks and half-man rocks. I don't know why they name it that, but these are kind of the smallest landscape rocks you can get at a rock yard, and they can be moved around. I wouldn't recommend picking them up and moving them more than trying to roll them more into place. But because this is a basalt rock, and it has rough edges, you know, the angled edges, not smooth like river rock. So you can build a low retaining wall with it. It will nestle in naturally without being mortared. This is, in my Seattle garden, that is what I did, because I had a very sloped yard and I was replacing railroad ties as well. So I did a terrace where I had one layer of the rock, and then I went back like 3 feet and did another layer of this same size rock, and it made a beautiful garden.
Okay, do you know what edging was used in the number 4 photo of the rain garden? I'm not sure.
Let me see if I can go back to that slide. This picture, this is like a concrete, it's manufactured concrete, and it's made as edging material. I've seen it in other gardens. It does create a nice hard edge where, you know, you can weed eat right up to it, and so it has some benefits that way. I'm not sure where you would find it exactly. I don't know if it's something that Home Depot or Lowe's would have, but it is like it comes in a curve like this, which is handy for if you have any curved beds, to create a sort of kind of like a brick, but it has the ability to create a curve with it. You could also use bricks that weren't curved and just leave a little gap in between as they curve. But there are advantages to this in that you can weed eat right up to it, and if your beds have lawn all the way around it, that can be a real advantage.
Okay, somebody wants to know, my lawn is moss. Is that good or bad?
If you ask me, it's good. It's green and it's soft. And if you know, if you're thinking about a bird-friendly garden, I'll just tell you that almost every single bird species that nests in the Pacific Northwest uses moss in their nests, as that soft little place in the middle where they lay their eggs and their little chicks grow up with that little moss bed, or they use moss mixed with their saliva to create the edging they kind of bind their nest materials together. So birds will love you if you have a moss lawn. And I think it really just depends on you. You know, a moss lawn is soft to walk on in bare feet. And it's just that it tends to get compacted in the winter if you walk on it, because it kind of pushes the moss into a more of a pancake. But you know, I'm a big fan of moss. So I would say, you know, unless it's really preventing you from using your lawn the way you want to use it, then I would say leave it. But the one thing about moss is that it is a sign of compacted soil in most cases. And because you can just think about it, that moss grows on roofs and sidewalks, which has no, they're very compacted, they're hard as a rock. So, so it is an indicator that not only do you have usually shade and moisture, but you have compaction in your soil. So your soil doesn't absorb as much rainfall when you have moss, because it doesn't put roots down in that help keep the ground open.
Okay. Somebody had a question about the follow-up question to the one about gravel. How much of the 1/4 minus should we put in? An inch?
Yes,
An inch.
the top inch.
Okay.
And it doesn't have to be exact. It could be 1.5 inches, it could, you know, but somewhere around that.
Okay. Here's another one. When is the best time to prune my native plants?
I would say that's a good question, and it depends a little bit on the plant. But for most deciduous plants, no matter whether they're native or non-native, the best time to prune them is when they are dormant. And so that would be in the winter. And for an evergreen, they don't go dormant that way. So you could prune them any time of year. But I would always avoid pruning during nesting season of birds, even if you're not necessarily have your main goal of creating a wildlife habitat. But birds depend on when they choose where they want to nest. It's very disturbing to them if there's any pruning done on that after they've put their nest there, especially after their young have hatched. So you want to be really careful pruning anything during nesting season. Okay.
Here's another one. Does your list of native plants show pictures of the plants?
No, it does not. But the resources that are on the sheet that will accompany the plant list, such as the Washington Native Plant Society and the King County Native Plant Resources, there is a native plant guide on both of those that will show you pictures. So all you have to do is put in the plant name and you'll see pictures of the flowers, fruit, and leaves.
Okay, another question. How to get rid of blackberry brambles?
Wow, that's a big one. The best way, if the land is suitable, the best way is to try to dig them out. But that's pretty difficult. And if you have them on a slope, then I would not do that, because then you could destabilize your slope. But you can kind of starve them out somewhat by continually cutting them back so that they keep using up their root energy to send out new growth. And then you cut that new growth out, you're depleting that energy out of the root, but it can take a while. I would go to the King County, and I'm sure Snohomish County has this too, a noxious weed website. They usually have a lot of lists of control suggestions for these things, and Himalayan blackberry is on the list. And I would say for an in-depth, you know, answer to your question, that I would go to that noxious weed website.
Okay, we have a gravel easement around part of our yard next to the road. Do you know of a good ground cover that would help absorb water, yet still make it possible to park?
There's not a lot of plants that can handle being driven over regularly. The things like the driveway that had the ground cover in the middle, that was woolly thyme. It can handle being walked on and occasionally driven on, but it's hard to find plants that could be driven on routinely or parked on routinely. So if there may be a solution, if you were willing to like rake out the gravel in the middle of it and create a little strip-like parking area, so that then you could have a ground cover right in the middle and still have the gravel on the easement for driving and parking on. And that might be a more sustainable way to achieve some permeability and also adding ground cover in there, rather than trying to grow something under where you're where cars are driving regularly.
Okay, I think that's all of our questions
All
for now.
right, some very
Oh.
good questions.
Yeah,
Okay, then we'll go into the second half of the presentation, and I'll turn my video back off. Okay. Now we're going to talk about creating habitat in your backyard for wildlife. And I'm going to be talking about native plants and other things that you can do that will really provide the kind of keys to success for attracting beneficial wildlife to your garden. So there's 4 basic things. Here's my high bush cranberry. Again, you can tell how much I love this plant. I just think it's so stunning. But basically for wildlife, the 4 things they need, you know, on a daily basis, and especially nesting places in the spring, but food, shelter, nesting places, and water. And, you know, we need those things too. But wildlife needs to be able to find them outdoors. So we're going to talk about these 4 elements. And the first one, food. When you see wildlife, whether it's birds or insects or, you know, tree frogs, they're looking for food all the time. And that's one reason why I advocate so strongly for growing native plants, is that wildlife recognizes it immediately. And so when you have native plants in your garden and you have birds flying over, they look down, they recognize that plant right away. There's no question in their mind that there's food there. The same is true with insects that are flying overhead. It's an instinctive recognition. And as I mentioned earlier, they know which ones are likely to harbor their favorite insect prey. Where are they going to find spiders if that's what they like to eat, or other insects. And so, and then, as I mentioned, they're just so low maintenance and really thrive despite you know, any weather extremes that we might have from year to year. So native plants are a great place to start. And if you already have a lot of plants in your garden and you just want to add, you just want to add more plants, there's a lot of native plant ground covers that you can add, or native plants that will fit in different spots in a niche in your garden. Like I said, you don't have to tear things out and start over, but when you add plants, think about adding as many natives as you can. There are some non-native plants that have been around for so long and been in cultivation and being sold by nurseries in the Northwest so long that wildlife has recognized their food. such as the Japanese barberry that's in the left-hand picture, and the flowering quince that's in the upper right. There are many non-natives that do have some wildlife value. And because one of the important things for wildlife is shelter, is another reason why I never advocate just like things out and start over. If you already have a garden with plants in it, you are providing some shelter and protection, potentially already some nesting places. And that's very valuable for wildlife as well. And thinking about when you're adding plants, many birds have a diet that includes seeds and fruit and insects. So birds will change. Robins are one of the birds that, eat primarily fruit in the late summer and fall when the soil is dried out, there's not as many worms. And in the spring, when the worms are all coming to the surface, they eat almost all worms. So birds and other wildlife do change what they eat seasonally. So if you can choose plants that provide more than one source, whether that's nectar and then the fruit that results from the flowers, or the seeds that result, you're kind of doubling your impact of the plant you choose. And in the upper right hand picture is one of the plants from the first part of the presentation, the strawberry tree, or Arbutus unedo. This is what it looks like when it is in fruit and it's beginning to flower for in the fall and early winter. And so there it is, just like a banquet. Also, spent flowers, if you let them go to seed, are then going to they will have provided nectar, and then they will provide seeds. And many, many birds love to eat the seeds of black-eyed Susan and cosmos. Other things that are in that daisy family are a big boost to nutrition for birds. And so if you leave some or all of the spent flowers on your plants without cutting them back, you will create a banquet on your spent flowers as well. And I think black-eyed Susans, when it's just a seed pod left, is just lovely looking. And especially if you see a goldfinch or a housefinch perched on top of there eating away, it's just as decorative as any flower. So I highly recommend leaving your seed pods. But it also means if you're going to create habitat, you have to be able to accept the fact that sometimes the wildlife is going to eat holes in your plants. This is a passion vine with a Gulf fritillary caterpillar on it, and then the adult is on the right-hand side. That's their favorite plant to lay eggs on and then have their caterpillars grow up on. So providing food sometimes means you have to make some sacrifices too. Or it might mean you have to be tolerant of some pest damage. And this is a patch of my hellebores and that would get, right when it would finish flowering and began to go to seed, all of a sudden aphid invasion would happen, usually right around this time of year. And the temptation is to get rid of all those aphids, but you're getting rid of food. You have to shift a little bit and thinking that, wow, there's a lot of birds that would want to eat that, and they will come and take care of it. Also, ladybugs and other beneficial insects would like to eat that. So if you can just sort of adjust your way of thinking about what pest insects might mean in the big picture, it might help you be more tolerant. If this is happening and it's right next to where you sit and on your deck, you might want to take the hose and spray off those aphids in a non-toxic way. But if this is happening out in your garden where you just stroll every day or two, and so you have your hellebores are getting sticky, but pretty soon they're gonna be covered with ladybug larvae, and and then your problem will be gone, maybe don't intervene. If you get rid of all your pest insects, you won't have as many birds and beneficial insects in your garden. That is, you know, if we intervene, that is the result. And here's an example of, you know, seeing what happens. The ladybug larvae have hatched on this patch of alder. This is inside Magnuson Park. And all of a sudden there's a little ladybug larva all just snarfing up all those aphids. And it's just super cool. And the picture on the lower right is an enlarged picture of a ladybug larva, like hoisting an aphid like Hulk Hogan, about to, you know, have din. And so it's you could see that whole cycle. And then after the ladybug larvae eat for a while, they pupate and then they emerge as a adult ladybug. So you could see that whole life cycle play out in your garden if you leave the aphids. If you don't, ladybugs, they won't lay their eggs where there isn't food for their larvae. So it's just, you know, it's just kind of a new way of thinking about pests in some ways. So next thing is shelter. The most diverse place in any forest or natural area is always the edge of the forest, where the forest kind of meets the meadow. So anytime you can create the feel of that in your garden, that's a great place for wildlife to find shelter. Mixing evergreen and deciduous plants in a variety of heights and forms, you're creating multiple layers of habitat. You're planting it and maintaining it informally. You're not doing any shearing or things like that, so that you're really mimicking that habitat that attracts wildlife. This is just kind of a shot from the second story window of my house in Seattle, where I created a backyard wildlife habitat. And you can kind of see there's places where birds can, and other creatures, whether they're on the ground or in the bushes or up in the trees, to kind of hop around without being out in the open too much, because all wildlife fears predators, and open space equals more vulnerability. So it's not that you can't have any open spaces, but you want to have parts of your garden to where wildlife can move through without being exposed. Nesting places can be, you know, many different trees and shrubs provide great nesting places for birds that build their little cup nests and tie them into the branches. But you can also add a nest box, because many birds will only nest in a cavity, and most neighborhoods don't have a lot of hollow trees in them anymore. So it's become more and more rare that cavity nesting birds find a natural nesting place. But if you put up a nest box, you're basically fooling them into thinking there's a hollow tree there that's just the right size for their nest. And the way you mulch your beds, besides helping with stormwater, preventing stormwater runoff, if you use coarse wood chip mulch or leaves, you're actually providing sort of a little hedgerow or a little forest habitat for beneficial insects to crawl around in there. And there's lots of airspace in that kind of mulch that protects them and also protects your soil. You want to make sure that you don't buy a nest box that is just built for decoration, because birds like their nest box to be the size that they would make if they could make it in a hollow tree. So the Audubon Society, and there's a lot of resources online that will tell you about what birds like which size box, and you can make it yourself or you can buy them. And but you want to make sure that there's no perch. That's also something that's frequently done in a decorative, decoration only kind of birdhouse, that you don't want to perch because that encourages predators to be able to get into the nest or reach into it. And you can paint it or decorate it, but you don't need to. And you want to make sure and clean it out. Like it shows with the brush, just kind of cleaning it all out, and then you can hose it out. And you want to have it end the year empty. But remember also, other types of wildlife need a place to nest and have shelter. And so rock piles, log piles, if you have like a part of your landscape that's sort of the back 40 little corner that you can let be a little more wild, you can, even in fairly urban areas, but especially suburban and rural areas, attract, tree frogs, garter snakes, which are the best slug eaters, non-poisonous snake, salamanders, black beetles. These are all really beneficial creatures to have in your garden, and they're awesome if you can have the space to do a place where they feel safe. And then lastly, water. And it can be something simple, like a bird bath. It's a great way to provide water. Access to water is essential for all wildlife, and just like it is for us. If you do something like a bird bath, similar to the nest box, you want to make it as safe as possible, because birds and insects that also will come to a bird bath are vulnerable when they're visiting the bird bath. So you want them to be able to get away, and that's one reason to put them within quick flight of a tree, but also to have a gently sloping side and not a big drop off like a cliff. That's they might have to struggle to get out of if they needed to. And regular cleaning with just a brush, similar to what I would use with cleaning out a nesting box, will prevent buildup of algae and bacteria, which can be unhealthy for them. Something you can build for butterflies, since they like to drink out of mud puddles to get the minerals out of the soil, is you can use a pond liner or even just a big saucer and, dig a hole, backfill the pond liner or the saucer with the soil, and line it with some rocks. Butterflies like to warm up their wings on the rocks, and then just water it and let it stay moist. Let it be just like a little summer mud puddle, and I will guarantee you that butterflies will come to it. They really, really like drinking the salts and the minerals out of the mud while they also get the water. And, really one of the most important, or the most important thing you can do, is to avoid using insecticides and herbicides. It will really make a difference in increasing the number of wildlife and the variety of wildlife that visit your garden, but it will also help our wildlife thrive. And it will preserve our water quality. It will improve our water quality, protect the wild salmon that we really have to help them recover if we want them to be a part of our Northwest heritage. So finding alternatives to pesticides and committing to being pesticide free as much as possible is really important. And then last but not least, if you have a cat, please keep it indoors. It's not as hard to transition an outdoor cat to an indoor cat as you might think, and it will really make a difference to all types of wildlife, not just birds, but small mammals and insects also. Will really make a difference. So I highly advocate for that. All right, now we're really reaching the end here, and I'm kind of went on a little too long on other stuff, but I still want to go through these growing your own food slides, because I love growing my own food and eating it, and I think a lot of folks are really interested in that right now. So you may have, you know, an empty spot or something you want to turn into a vegetable garden. You can do it. Even in a small way in your garden, you can grow a lot of food. Um, this wheelbarrow was a day's harvest from a 300 square foot garden. Now, granted, it was harvest season and there's a lot of squash in there, but you can get a lot of food out of a small place. And you can grow in containers. You can, you know, there's a lot of ways to maximize no matter what situation you have in your garden. But you want to think about what are the resources you have, because vegetables tend to take a lot of sun, and they need that good soil that we, you know, talking about earlier, adding organic matter. So you want to really assess where's the best place on your property that you could be successful. And that includes, do you have a fence or an arbor that you could grow food on? You can grow a lot vertically too. Or if you're planning to build something, build it so it can also grow food on it. And kind of can think outside the box instead of just thinking, oh, we have to have a designated area that's only food. You can grow food in ornamental beds. You can mix and match and have beautiful food crops in with your ornamental beds. You can grow them as ground covers, like lettuce crops, strawberries, things like parsley, any kind of low growing edibles can be planted around shrubs as the ground cover and be harvested like that. You do want to consider maintenance on where you plant things or where you situate a new bed so that you don't forget about it, because they do take more maintenance than a typical ornamental garden. And you want to make sure there's good access to water. Whether you're going to hand water or use drip irrigation, you need to make sure that it's a convenient situation so you won't forget to water, because they do take more water, food plants do, than ornamental plants as a general rule. And also you want to make sure that you have access to be able to do the, you know, weeding, mulching, and harvesting that you need to do around the beds. I love drip irrigation. It for food gardens, it really delivers the water in a great way, and it makes it easy to change each year as you rotate crops, and you don't worry about washing the pollen out of your flowering crops like tomatoes, eggplants, peppers, and squash. When you're watering, you have to be really careful when you hand watering those crops that you don't accidentally wash the pollen out and make it impossible to get the food that will come from bees and other pollinators. So if you can do a simple drip irrigation system in your food garden, I think it really pays off. And as I said before, organic matter is really important. Food crops need that probably more than any other type of plant. And the same kind of recipe I talked about before, mixing 3 inches of compost into a new bed, or just scritching some in the top layer of soil in an existing bed, and then just, you know, adding a little more as time goes on. Make sure to plan for pollination. This is another great reason to have native plants around, and other perennials and herbs that attract bees and other pollinators, so that your tomatoes and your squash and your peppers and things like that get pollinated. That's, you know, a frequent complaint of folks that say, hey, my plants are blooming, but I'm not getting any fruit. It's maybe that there's not enough other things around attracting the pollinators so that they find your flowering vegetables. And beneficial insects are your friends. And these are some of the ones that eat aphids also, and also will a lot of them will pollinate plants, whether on purpose, like bees do, or accidentally, because they're visiting the flowers as well. Another really important thing, and I wish I had more time to go into it in depth, but crop rotation is really important. And you just don't want to grow the same plant family year after year in the same soil, because it can build up diseases and pests that last quite a long time. And if you're rotating, these are the three plants families that you need to make sure to rotate. Your tomato family, which includes peppers and eggplant, your onion family, which includes your garlic and leeks and shallots and things like that. And then the broccoli family, which includes just a whole host of things like cauliflower, cabbages, arugula, just collard greens, all kinds of really yummy things belong to that family. It's really important to rotate those crops. And if you don't, you can end up with these diseases, which are really make your food inedible and, last in the soil for many years. And that's where the real danger is that they don't just affect 1 year crop, they affect your ability to grow that plant family in that soil for years to come. All right. Well, I do have a section on sheet mulching, but we have reached the end of our time, and I want to give time for more Q&A. So I think we'll have to wait and I'll just say once again, visit the seattletilth.org website to learn more about sheet mulching, and also call the Master Gardener hotline. And I don't know this for sure, but they may have a sheet mulching handout, or certainly be able to give you some step-by-step information about that. So I think we'll go back to a slide that looks beautiful, and then I'll take some more questions.
Okay. First one, what is a natural way to get rid of dandelions?
The best way to do it is to dig them with a tool that will get them all the way, get that taproot out. It's hard work, but if you can get that taproot out, and especially when the soil is moist, and before we've hit summer where the soil gets really hard and dry and hard to dig, this is a good time to do it.
Okay. What are the berries on the one food slide? I think that referred to the wildlife.
That was tall Oregon grape.
Okay.
And the low Oregon grape that I also showed photos of earlier, that has the same type of fruit. Very attractive to wildlife.
Okay. What is hog feed? Hog feed, is it for mulching?
Yes, it is typically it's very big wood chips. So it's used for, like, if you're going to need to drive a vehicle in somewhere and you didn't want to compact the soil. It's big wood chips, so it's a little coarse, a little too coarse for most landscapes. But arborist wood chips that you could get for free from an arborist that was doing tree work in your area are random sized chips, but they're big, but not big like hog feed or hog fuel. I don't know why they call it that either.
I don't know. How do you deter moles naturally?
The Washington State Department of Fish and Wildlife has a recipe it's very similar to the one that Cisco Morris advocates with this mole mint blaster, he calls it. So I think you can get it from Cisco's website, which is just cisco.com, or the Washington Department of Fish and Wildlife website. They have a whole section on how to sort of live with wildlife and deter things like moles and some other things that can become pests. And so it's a great resource for all kinds of things.
Okay, will sheet mulching be in the handouts too?
No, sorry.
And I have one comment. Rabbits love the low growing vegetables.
They do. And to prevent rabbits, the best thing is to get a big roll of chicken wire, 24 inches tall, bury the 6 inches of it in the ground, make a little perimeter fence with some stakes and the chicken wire, but bury 6 inches into the ground so they can't dig under your fence. And because they won't jump over an 18-inch tall fence if it's staked so that it stays vertically and doesn't bend over. They don't like to do that. So you may have to, if you have a lot of rabbits, you may have to put a little chicken wire fence around.
I have one more comment from Glenda. Dandelions are good for bees. They are one of the earliest flowers that feed the bees in the spring.
Yeah. I'm glad you brought that up because they also are really attractive to butterflies. So if you want to let them grow, you're actually being wildlife friendly. And there's a lot of birds that love to eat dandelion seeds. And so one of the benefits of attracting birds to your garden is that a lot of times they will eat the seeds. So they won't necessarily get exponentially worse if you let them go to seed.
Okay, I have a tool that does dig dandelions, but it leaves holes in the lawn. Are the holes okay?
Yeah, you're actually it's an opportunity to throw a little compost in there. It's like a natural aeration that you're doing.
And I think that's it.
Wow. Thanks everyone for great questions. I really appreciate it. And thanks for being patient for me to run a little long too.
Thank you so much, Emily. That was so wonderful. I jotted down lots of fun little words that you said. And I wanted to reiterate that I will be sending out the handouts tomorrow, as well as the YouTube recording, so you can watch this again or share with friends. And just thank you to Emily so much for this education. This was wonderful. Thanks to the City of Everett for sponsoring these, for Karen for answering the questions. Philomena, hope you feel really good. And gosh, I think that's it. Any closing thoughts from you, Emily?
Happy gardening and happy Earth Day. I'm glad to be here.
Sounds great. Thank you so very much. Everybody have a wonderful night. Catch some sun rays. Happy Earth Day. And we'll see you again on the 27th and 29th for the next 2 webinars for Everett. Thanks so much. Okay. Bye, Emily. Thank you.
Bye.